Welcome to the Fast Times podcast. Today we're talking to San Jose Mayor Mahan. Since winning his first term in 2022, he's been focusing on getting the basics right in San Jose. He's reversed a years-long staffing shortage at the San Jose Police Department, and he's reduced unsheltered homelessness and gotten more people into treatment and recovery. And the people of San Jose are noticing. He won re-election in 2024 with 87% of the vote. And today we'll dive into what prompted Matt to get into politics in the first place and lead the tech world, what he's proud of most during his time in office, what he sees of the work that's still to be done, and what challenges he sees in the Trump era being a Democratic mayor and for our party, the Democratic Party, here in California and nationally. And so we're excited to get into it today. Thanks for being here, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a real pleasure. It's a real treat for both Tom and I admit our biases on camera and say that we're really big fans of you and what you've done in San Jose. We think it's a model for what cities and states should be doing everywhere. And so we're excited to get into your head about what your process has been and your plans. I just wanted to ask up front, what made you want to leave the tech world? You're running a startup and get into politics.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the pod. I'm excited for the conversation. I guess I kind of have two answers to that. One is just growing up. I grew up in a little farming town called Watsonville, and we had a lot of challenges growing up: high unemployment, high crime. I ended up getting a work-study scholarship to go to high school all the way in San Jose and commuted. And so I would read the local newspaper and was genuinely interested in the differences between the very vibrant and prosperous San Jose region where I was going to high school and my hometown that had a lot of challenges. So that kind of sparked that interest in civics and public policy, and carried through my entire education. I was always pretty civically engaged. But to your question, I then ended up in the tech sector, which is a long and winding story that I won't bore you with. But I became increasingly frustrated with the public policy failures I saw playing out. In fact, at the time I was living here in San Francisco. I lived here for about 7-8 years, ran a couple of startups. And every year we had to increase salaries 8 to 10% just so that our employees could keep up with rising rents. It wasn't even like making their life better. It was just to keep a hold of their housing. And frankly, we were some of the most privileged people in the local economy.
And this is back in like the 2010s.
Yeah, exactly. I got into tech in 2008 and stayed in the sector all the way until 2019. So I saw that evolution of tech migrating to San Francisco, the incredible growth here, but in parallel, the total inability to deal with growth and manage it and shape it and create a more inclusive economy. And so I just became frustrated with that over time. Homelessness, public safety issues, lack of investment in infrastructure. The challenges seemed to mount up, and yet every year on the ballot, there was another tax, another bond. It was just revenue measure after revenue measure, and nothing seemed to be moving the needle. And that got me more deeply involved. And eventually, when our second startup was acquired, and I was sort of out of a job, figuring out what to do next, our city council seat opened up, and I decided to throw my hat in the ring. Very different world. Went from being CEO of a company with 50, 60 employees to wandering the neighborhoods of South San Jose, knocking on doors, asking voters what they cared about, what they thought city government could do better. And it just kind of sparked a whole new career path and passion for me.
If I could ask you a personal question right here at the start. I'm a millennial. I think you're a millennial.
I'm an old millennial.
Yeah.
I'm barely making the cutoff. I was born in 82.
I was born in 88, so I'm right in the middle of the bulge. But I came of age as an adult during the Obama administration. I worked in the Obama White House. I think a lot of people in our cohort are civically inclined and want to make an impact. But I think for a lot of my friends who are in the tech sector, it doesn't seem like the cost benefit is there to jumping into politics or serving in the public sector these days versus becoming a founder of a company or becoming an executive and exercising impact through technology or even just kind of a for-profit model. So I'm curious, I look at you with admiration because I think you provide a template for people, but I'm curious how you see that. How did you think about getting into the public sector with, it seems like, and I will list them, like the cost these days of having, half of your constituents hate you or even make up stuff about you that's not true on the internet. The polarization, the vulgarness in the discourse, and also just the inability to deal with all that and still seemingly get less done in most public positions, whether you're a councilman or a supervisor here in SF or mayor. It just seems like it's just so much harder to get stuff done in the public sector and so much more personally costly. How did you think about that choice and how has it played out for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly the impediments to creating change can be frustrating. government is slower than the private sector, sometimes for good reason, not always. I think, for me at least, some of the challenges you point to are somewhat mitigated by working at the local level. I'm a big advocate for getting involved at the most local level you can: neighborhood association, PTA, council district, and really starting there, because that's still at a human scale where you can get people around a table and literally talk out a problem and potential solutions with people who you might just be diametrically opposed to politically at the national level. And so I like that very human, tangible, problem-solving aspect of local government. Certainly, it doesn't pay as well as many private sector careers. So that's a trade-off you have to think about. Unfortunately, I think that our high cost of living in California pushes a lot of people away from public service who would otherwise want to be in it. Overall, I find it incredibly rewarding. I think many of us grow up chasing achievements and success. Our education system is very centered on getting that score back, and you want to make your parents proud, which is good. But I think the public sector, there's a different kind of job satisfaction to seeing the impact in somebody else's life, and the kind of opportunity, quality of life, safety. I mean, very fundamental things that you can help provide for your community. I don't think there's a more rewarding career. I say that both as mayor today, but also a different form of public service. I was a public school teacher for a couple of years, and I still think back to those years as some of the most satisfying work experiences I ever had. So I think there are a lot of positives to it, as well as the challenges you point to.
As a founder, I spend most of my time thinking about how do we recruit and retain great people. And I think any great organization comes down to the quality of its people. I think that's also true about government. If you could wave a magic wand and do anything to the system to help it attract, our best and brightest in this country, let's say just even at a city or local level, what would you do?
I think we need to have a conversation that will take time, and I don't know what the answers are, but we need to look at structural reforms to the system. I think our biggest challenge in California is how decentralized we are. A big part of my job and a big headache is just the coordination cost of figuring out even something as simple as, and to some extent technology can help with this, but whose land is that? You'll have graffiti and maybe we'll clean up our side of the street, but the other side is the county, but maybe it's the water district or the school board's responsibility or the transportation board. They're all different bodies, often different elected bodies. And so there's a territoriality, there's a complexity to this decentralization that imposes huge communication and coordination costs. And I think we need to be willing to open up a conversation about political reform at a structural level, because people want talented, entrepreneurial people want to solve problems. And if we have a system that is structurally unable to deliver results and try things and iterate and run experiments and learn by doing, and then ultimately move the ball down the field, smart entrepreneurial folks are going to look for other opportunities in the private sector that give them that ability to have an impact. So I think we need structural reform. I don't think it's an easy thing to solve, but just the separation between big cities and counties, for example, is a huge challenge I grapple with on a daily basis.
I love hearing you talk about structural reform because it just feels like things have gotten so complicated, and that the processes and the structures of government of just like layer over layer over layer of more laws, more more requirements, more criteria for things have led to this like noose around our growth, our ability to get even basic things done. And of course, we have really complicated things to do as well. And I think a lot of centrists looked at Doge, not at what Doge actually did, but the promise of Doge is actually like a good thing of this like smart deregulation and like the idea that like, oh, maybe technocracy or, using not just adding, but removing or making something more efficient, like we could actually have a promise of that. Obviously, that didn't happen at the federal level. But I think a lot of those concepts are often associated with the right. Like when I hear the term deregulation, I think about Reagan, and I think about all the bad aspects of letting corporations
Right.
into solve public sector problems. Have you thought about a way to do this structural reform in a way that benefits people and not, big corporations or private interests?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt we need it. People are voting with their feet. We have seen over the last decade, each year, people leave California. I think we finally bottomed out and are starting to grow again. But overall, over the last decade, we have seen hundreds of thousands of people leave for red states where cost of living is lower and they are more likely to achieve their version of the American dream. And that's largely possible because of the regulatory environment they're in. We have to figure out in California how to evolve ourselves and continue to protect our great open spaces and have clean air and clean water and achieve economic inclusivity for working people. We want to achieve our progressive outcomes, our progressive goals, but we have to do it in a way that actually works in practice. You're starting to see the pendulum swing back. The state just the governor just signed a budget that includes the most significant CEQA reform we've seen in decades,
Yep.
which is positive. It is a huge challenge and something that we're going to have to grapple with. We have to reinvent government. We became increasingly, you talk about regulation or deregulation feeling like a conservative concept. We have to move beyond that. There was an era of time when it was the environmental movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement. It was largely driven by legal tools. It was lawyers using the law to make the world more just. We have to now be willing to, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, think a little differently about our regulatory environment and be willing to go back to first principles and say, are these processes, are these rule sets serving us anymore? And I think in many cases, the answer is no. I mean, high-speed rail is the classic. I know Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson just wrote a book, and that was kind of exhibit A in the book. We obviously have to be able to invite investment. And in California, culturally, particularly in the Bay Area, I think we need a more nuanced view of the world than this concept that just business is bad or corporations are evil. That's sort of an easy trope to throw around. At the end of the day, we want competitive markets, and we need a certain amount of regulation, but investment is good, growth can be good, and we need to not be scared to say that.
When we talk about structural reform, I don't think we can have that conversation without talking about homelessness, especially in California, because it's many of those structural reform challenges that have led to the choking off of new housing, the lack of infill housing, the lack of density in cities like San Francisco, where, I was down on 20th and New Hampshire, down in Dogpatch, and there's all this open space of old warehouses down there that have been sitting empty for like 30 years. I'm like, why aren't there apartments here? Like, what's the problem, right? And so I think that's part of it. And then it gets compounded by, the social detriments of being homelessness, which are drug addiction and mental health issues. It's behavioral health issues. And it's led it's put California into a position where we're kind of like the punching bag. San Francisco was the punching bag for a while, but now it's kind of the whole state of California gets punched pretty hard by the right on homelessness. The state has 40% of the nation's homeless population, almost 200,000 people that are experiencing homeless in the state. But San Jose and your administration has been pretty much the lone bright spot in California in regards to homelessness, is the way that I see it, right? As a recovery advocate, as someone that's in the homeless space, that's in the drug policy space, you've taken the steps to kind of move towards interim solutions to homelessness. You implemented a recent policy or ordinance called responsibility to shelter. And I just really would like you to tell our viewers, how did San Jose and you arrive at those conclusions, which are a departure from the kind of progressive narrative that all we need is more affordable housing or all we need is more social housing, which sound great. And then when you look at the cost of doing those things, it's just not realistic.
Well, I arrived at where we are today, and I don't want to pretend that we figured it out, but we are seeing steady declines in unsheltered homelessness in San Jose, which is really exciting. My mission when I ran, and to this day, is to end the era of encampments, to get to functional zero unsheltered homelessness, meaning if you become homeless, you have a safe place with services to get back on your feet, to get whatever pathway out of homelessness you need, which will look different for different people. And I arrived at least my current understanding of how we solve this problem by looking at the same data you were just referencing. I was reading our community plan to end homelessness, and I think we were starting our second 5-year community plan to end homelessness in Santa Clara County. When we had completed the first 5-year plan, I think we had spent $1 billion and had more people living outside than when we started, which was pretty disheartening. And so I read through it, and there wasn't a lot of math in it. And so I did some back of the envelope math, and it became clear to me by reading it that the primary strategy in what was at that point laying out basically a 10-year vision, because we were starting the second iteration, was we were just going to build our way out with publicly subsidized brand new housing, not even buying old housing stock, but build brand new publicly subsidized housing. And when you do the math, it's overwhelming. You need, just in San Jose, over $5 billion to solve the problem just for the people on the streets today. Statewide, you need well over $100 billion, and that's just for the folks who are living outside in tents. That does nothing for working families living on the edge or anybody who might subsequently fall into homelessness. And obviously we know homelessness is not a static population. So I think the answer, as I have tried to do the math, talk to a diverse range of people, and really think through logically, how might we end unsheltered homelessness? I think we have to approach it from multiple angles, and particularly from two that I've tried to focus on. One is we need a lot more housing supply, but the reality is we will not get there by simply passing multi-billion-dollar bonds. Not to say that we shouldn't have some publicly subsidized housing for those who need it most. I'm all for it, but it only scales so much. So we will need to unbreak the housing production market. We will need to be able to do what Austin just did, what Seattle did before that, which is have market forces drive investment in new housing supply for the workforce. At the other angle, we need to address unsheltered homelessness and the complexity of helping people work through trauma, addiction, mental health issues, the whole constellation of issues you were referencing. And it starts with stabilizing people in a safe environment with services. And if I have $10 to spend, I'd rather spend $1 on the shelter portion and $9 on the human services that help people turn their lives around than what we've been doing, which is spend $9 on brand new, basically market rate apartments that would take 6 years to build, and then $1 for the services. I'd rather get the scale of more safe managed places, get everyone indoors. The sooner you stabilize somebody, the sooner they're on the road to recovery and have a real chance at turning their lives around. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. You know this better than I do. But it starts with getting someone into a managed environment with services.
I think that's the right take. I mean, I tell critics, and you have critics of your responsibility to shelter.
Yeah, I didn't answer that part of the question. Sorry.
I get attacked pretty hard on Twitter sometimes for some of the things that I say too, which maybe I go a little harder than you because I'm not a mayor and I can. You know, I always tell folks, it's like, look, we're all for building housing. None of us in this room are against housing. I'm a YIMBY, you're a YIMBY. I mean, we're all for building housing. But at the same time, we're doing people experiencing homelessness a disservice by making the waiting room the street.
That's right.
And nowhere is that more obvious than places like LA. If you go to Skid Row, there are people that have been on the street for a decade, for 20 years.
We're getting into multi-generational homelessness.
That's right.
In LA.
That's right.
I mean, it's scary. And we know the longer you leave someone out on the streets, the harder it is to ever help them get to any level of self-sufficiency. It's cruel to those individuals who are trapped on the streets without an alternative. It's also very costly. I don't know that people realize the true cost, just the public sector cost. And there are many different studies out there, and the numbers range from $50,000 to say $100,000, but that's per person per year to leave someone in misery on the streets. That's the impact of all those 911 calls, emergency room visits, trash pickup, environmental damage. That doesn't even talk about quality of life, the suffering of the individual. It's extremely costly to not solve this problem.
We've seen progress in San Jose on homelessness. I know because I've been involved with you in kind of getting some of this stuff over the hump and getting it put into action. Where do you see like San Jose going in the next 2 years with this? And then what can we do just as individuals that are concerned about this issue to actually get your message out to other cities? Or what are you doing to get your message and your platform and your plan that's working out to other cities so that they can maybe start thinking about different ways to approach homelessness?
Well, this conversation helps. As I look at the landscape over the next, call it 5 years or so, my hope is to do a few things in parallel. One is we need to execute our playbook. We still have a lot of interim housing and various types of shelter and affordable housing to open. Most of it is converted motels. We're buying old motels as cheaply as we can, rehabbing them and getting people indoors. They get a private room, their own bathroom. It's very dignified, but it's a lot faster and cheaper than building brand new. We're using modular construction. We're testing our first safe sleeping site. We have the South Bay's largest safe parking site. We're still testing different variations on what is fundamentally the same model, essentially, safe sleeping being a little different. But we want people to be inside, indoors, in a site that has security, consistent access to sanitation, 3 meals a day, and case management. And there's a huge shortage of services around behavioral health issues, particularly addiction and appropriate settings. And we can go deeper into that. Again, you have a lot more expertise there. So one is running our playbook. We will open over 1,000 new safe, managed places for people to be who are today out in a tent who will be able to move indoors this year. So we've got to do that and continue to look for opportunities to expand that system. Number two, from the other end, we have been pushing very hard on reducing fees, speeding up permitting processes. CEQA reform is going to be great. We have nearly 70 urban villages in the city that are basically housing ready, places that have transit, have walkable neighborhoods, and we want to build up and build densely in those areas. And then the third prong is what you were referencing, which is we need a fair share approach. I've been working with Senator Catherine Blakespear down in San Diego area on a bill that would create a statewide framework. And it's gone through many iterations. Believe it or not, there are forces in Sacramento that have wanted to kill this. But at the end of the day, we will not end unsheltered homelessness in California if we don't get every city and every county to do its part in a way that the state can support with funding and other resources, but also hold us accountable for. We can't, even though we're a big city, we can't solve the problem for the entire South Bay. San Francisco can't solve it for all the surrounding communities and beyond. You all can attract folks from everywhere, right? We need a fair share framework. And I'm happy to share more about the bill if you're curious, but we're going to have to get everybody to do their part.
You talked there a lot about the supply side of the equation for homelessness and housing, but I want to ask you about the demand side.
Yeah.
And specifically about the role of law enforcement and the medical system and healthcare in getting people to accept treatment and get on the path to recovery.
Yeah.
The two status quo policies that I think are failed in California are housing first, which you talked about, but there's also harm reduction, which all failed policies started with a good idea back in the day, but has kind of morphed into this sense that if you're on the street, like what you do with your body is your choice, and no matter how many people it hurts or impacts. And I've talked to like thousands of people at this point who have told me that if you're clinically seriously addicted, you need to hit rock bottom, or they hit rock bottom before they really considered making a different life choice. And the two places that tend to happen are when you wake up in an ER, in a hospital bed, or when you're arrested. I've spoken to many people who say that they got sober in handcuffs and they're glad for it. And these are from folks who have been through it. And it seems like public opinion is shifting a little bit on this, but I think you've been out front with advocating for compelling treatment for addiction. And I think that's like the third rail in this sector of what role should law enforcement have in encouraging people, like giving people a choice to either pursue recovery and get their lives back or not and pay some kind of consequences. How do you think about that, and what's the work to be done there?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done there, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I am skeptical of the harm reduction approach when it comes to the current situation we see on our streets with the potency of meth and fentanyl and various combinations of hard drugs, with the accessibility, the low cost. It is. I have a cousin who, and this was years ago, but spent some time on the streets because of an addiction, and have heard many of those same stories that you were describing of people finding that it was the 30 days in the county jail that ultimately saved their life. And I'm not advocating that we lock everybody up and send them to the county jail. I think we can do better than we've done in the past. We're always learning and iterating and hopefully evolving in a better direction. But I think we have a duty to intervene both for the well-being of the individual and for the broader community that's incredibly impacted, especially when addiction spills out into our public spaces like our sidewalks and our parks. That's complicated, easier said than done. We have moved forward a responsibility to shelter policy in San Jose that effectively says that if you're repeatedly refusing interim housing, or if we have it, affordable housing, we will use our law enforcement and city attorney powers to do our best to compel you to engage through a drug or mental health court. Some have called this criminalizing homelessness, which I strongly object to. This is when we are offering someone a private room, low barrier. You can bring your partner, your pets, your possessions. We don't have strict sobriety requirements. We don't have a curfew. We don't kick you out after a certain period of time. We provide 3 meals a day. It's every possible opportunity to stabilize and choose a path. But camping shouldn't be a choice, especially when it has the kind of negative impact it has on all of us. I've talked to the heartbreaking stuff, small but really important, meaningful for people like the camp counselor who can't take the kids across the street to the park because there's drug use right next to the swing set. And so those kids don't get to go to the park anymore. It's not okay. So I think we have a duty to intervene. I think, unfortunately, law enforcement is required. I say unfortunate because I talk to our police officers. They don't want to intervene in these cases, but I think they understand and support what I'm trying to do here and have been actually some of our first endorsers of the policy because they experience the revolving door every day. It's our police officers, our firefighters, our social workers who see the same people cycling, and eventually often ODing or doing something so horrific they end up in jail for a long period of time. And so I think we have to intervene. I think what that intervention ought to look like is every possible opportunity to get the person on a treatment pathway. And one of the big missing links in California right now, as I understand it, is a lack of secure treatment. Somebody who's fundamentally just deep in the throes of an addiction to a hard drug that they can't get out of really doesn't belong in the county jail, even if it would save their lives. There has to be a third space that's not the sidewalk, that's not the jail or prison, but may not be totally voluntary. The way I look at it is we've got a hockey team in San Jose, the Sharks. It's the penalty box. It's like, okay, we've offered you housing. We've offered you services. You've repeatedly refused. Your addiction, your behavior, even if you don't have a lot of control over it, is affecting the broader community. We're going to send you to this third space, this secure treatment facility that's therapeutic, that's rehabilitative, but it's involuntary for 30 days the first time. Then 60 days, then 90 days. And it's a way to try to get somebody to take a different path that should be supportive and therapeutic, but not necessarily voluntary after repeated attempts to give people a voluntary path.
I think you said the right thing when you talked about behavior, right? We're not criminalizing homelessness. It's not a crime to be homeless.
Correct.
It's not a crime to be addicted to drugs. But when the behavior that you exhibit as a result of those things breaks the law, like you're stealing, shoplifting,
damaging public property,
assaulting somebody, getting into a fight, whatever.
That's right.
Those are behaviors that violate the law, that the law would respond to anyone, you or me or anyone else doing. And that's the message that I try to explain to people that come at you and say you're criminalizing the homeless, because you hear that all the time. That's literally a buzz term of the homeless advocates and the harm reduction advocates, is you're criminalizing. And we're like, no, we're actually holding you accountable for behavior. And the irony is that they know that, right? But they're so set on having this decriminalization narrative take hold, hands off everybody, and that they just need housing like you can wave a magic wand and create 200,000 new units of housing across the state without bankrupting the state.
Right.
Well, I think part of this comes back to like norms and what we think is acceptable and okay, because implicit in what those activists are saying is being homeless is not a crime. That's what they say all the time. And that's why they're accusing you of criminalizing homelessness. And implicit in what you're saying is this idea that there are certain behaviors that are not okay. And especially when they impact other people. and we have to hold people accountable to those things. And so it's like a hearts and minds debate for me. And I think about this all the time because there's lots of policies you can put in place and structures and supports. But ultimately, we have to convince people that I think what we all believe is how we should govern ourselves and relate to each other. I think certain other states seem to like that's embedded in Texas. Like you just don't see this kind of behavior in Texas because I think people know that if they are doing crazy shit on the sidewalk, like they will get arrested, and there is a no tolerance policy for it.
Right.
You've broken through in San Jose to the extent that you've got these policies passed. I actually think that we're in the majority. Certainly, we have tens of thousands of followers who agree with us. But how do we shift that further and like change, the culture in California around what is acceptable, what we think is okay?
Well, I think it starts with communication, and we're doing that. You both have expertise in this. I've seen you on social media. I think you're both very effective. We have to engage more people in a conversation, and ultimately, the beauty of democracy is that it does come down on some level. I don't want to be too idealistic about it, but civic discourse ultimately leads to public opinion that leads to voting behaviors that changes who's elected. And at the end of the day, I fundamentally believe in that process. It's messy, it's convoluted, but I spend a lot of time on public engagement, public communication, trying to engage with people and educate, and frankly, do something that most electeds don't do and makes many of my colleagues uncomfortable, which is even though I am in elected office and have other elected colleagues, I still try to organize and educate our residents to put pressure on us as electeds, which is kind of counterintuitive. But I tell them, hey, we have this vote coming up, and this is something I campaigned on, and I believe we need this change, and here's why. I always try to give rational arguments and even share a little bit of what the other side's saying and say, this is your moment to call your council member. This is a challenge I've had with politics, at least as practiced in California, and part of what I think gives me a different perspective coming out of the tech sector. It's very clubby. It's everybody becomes friends. It's this, Democratic supermajority that's very hierarchical, and everybody kind of looks out for each other. And I have been willing to do things a little differently, but that also rubs people the wrong way. I mean, I leaned out early on Prop 36 largely because of the opportunity to have treatment mandated felonies in really serious cases. And you saw the establishment did not appreciate that I sort of stepped out of turn and took on that position without checking in with anybody. But it's just, I mean, again, I coming out of tech, it's all about what works, right? It's figuring out what's our outcome we want, and then how do we get there in a way that's feasible and ethical. But you keep trying until you get the outcome. Nothing else really should matter. But that's a little foreign to the political culture we have.
I'm curious because you've been right with your policy, but you've also been very effective politically, and like you have broken through in ways that I think other mayors in California or other places, have not. They haven't gone beyond that. So, I'm curious, like I think Elon is kind of like this, where not in a way I would agree with, but he like calls shots and then he makes it happen. Like he like gets the ball in the net. Like again and again in a way that is upsetting to me, but he's good at it. And I think you seem to have that ability too. So beyond, it sounds like advocate, organizing your and mobilizing your followers outside of your office to back you when the time comes. Have there been other things you've developed, like tips and tricks in your playbook that have helped you, win on the politics and not just the policy?
I don't know. I would offer two thoughts on that. Number one, most importantly, I have a great team. It's in conversations with my team as we think about what's missing from this conversation. Where do we go next? What's worked? What hasn't? And how do we get ahead of this and try to drive the conversation? But that's not just coming from me. That's building a great team and having smart people and really thinking through these things in a rigorous way. The other, which partly does come down to the individual elected, is your risk tolerance. Are you willing to say things that will lose you friends? Frankly, the decision to be public in my support of Prop 36 and be early, in fact, I think I was the first Democratic mayor, and obviously it's a nonpartisan office, but people know I'm a registered Democrat, to endorse Prop 36 of a big city. My relationship with the governor and many of the leaders in Sacramento changed dramatically and probably permanently because of that decision. You have to be willing to do that. And that's not easy. I have always thought that the only way that I would want to do this kind of job is with nothing to lose and in a willingness to go back to the private sector.
So let's talk about Democrats for a second. Yeah, you seem to have a good take on where the ball is going. I think even, frankly, opposing a lot of Democrats are dismayed by the ineffectiveness of our governor currently. And so, to me, that's like you picking the right side of an issue for a lot of people who want the Democratic Party to deliver better here in California. And I think the key to winning national elections is showing that we can govern effectively in states where we have supermajorities or cities where we run everything. What's your take on the state of the Democratic Party right now? And where do you think we go to start to win again?
I think the party is out of touch. And I think every Democratic leader, and I say this for myself, I'm all about taking my own medicine. This is how I started and will continue as long as I'm in this kind of role. I think every Democrat or aspiring Democratic candidate ought to start by going and knocking on a few thousand doors. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to be in touch with the common sense of the community. When I first ran for city council, which was now, just over 5 years ago, I suppose, I started by literally just for those first 6 months or so, I wasn't raising money. I wasn't going to events. I wasn't going around saying I'm a candidate. I just knocked on doors. I knocked on 10,000 doors, literally. And when you get yelled at by that many people on their doorstep about the tent encampment at the end of the street that prevents their kids from feeling safe walking to school, the pothole that hasn't been paved in 10 years, even though, you're paying $15,000 a year in property taxes. I mean, you just hear these over and over again. I kept hearing, where does all the money go? Why aren't we making progress on these core issues? And I forget whose saying it was, but there's no such thing as Democratic potholes or Republican potholes. They're just potholes and they need to get filled. They need to get fixed. I think if you can stay focused on what people care about, what affects their daily lives, and be honest, and this is the thing that concerns me about our national politics, and I think both parties are very guilty of it, but we have to be honest with people about our diagnosis of the problems we face and what the actual possible solutions are and the trade-offs they entail. As economists like to say, there's no free lunch. And we always want to tell people the other side is the reason. It's just the blue team or the red team that is the reason, or immigrants, or pick some group that's the reason that we have this problem. And I have a solution. It's really simple and it's not going to cost you anything. And that's the subtext of so much of our politics. And I think that is the greatest risk to our democracy, is we're not being honest with ourselves. But we're also lucky, I guess I'll just say, in San Jose, we have a really engaged and educated electorate, and that helps. It makes it easier to run as a more kind of independent, free-thinking candidate.
You started this conversation talking about affordability. That you had to pay your employees more here in San Francisco just to afford rent. I think Donald Trump won the presidency, and Mamdani in New York recently won by talking about affordability and how central of a concern that is to voters on all sides of the spectrum. But San Jose remains, one of the most unaffordable cities in the country, and it's run by Democrats. So how do you think about convincing voters that Democrats, including you and your administration, are serious about affordability when the trend lines are going in the wrong directions?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a pattern that plays out across large blue cities across the country, and some red ones. I mean, my wife's from Miami. I think it's at this point a pretty red city, but it's increasingly unaffordable. So first, I'd say I don't think there's a silver bullet to affordability. We need to get a few different things right. One, we need to embrace innovation, because over time, innovation and technology can give you more value per hour of labor, per dollar spent. So that's why I have parted ways with many of my fellow Democrats on things like autonomous vehicles. Are they perfect? No. But are they the future? I think so. And will we ultimately have fewer accidents and more accessible and affordable transportation? I think so. I also am for investing in public transit because we need mass mobility solutions. So we need to embrace innovation. I think the Democratic Party, particularly under the Biden presidency, made a big mistake in rejecting the innovation economy and tech companies. I think we have to be pro-investment, both in public infrastructure that creates more opportunity, like mobility being kind of the obvious one, transit, but also water, energy. We have to be for investment. We have to get out of the way. We talked about smart deregulation, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we have to re-examine every process and every regulation and say, is it actually serving us? We keep updating the building code, and I think there's been a proposal, at least in Sacramento, to maybe freeze changes to the building codes for a few years and let everybody catch up. I think that would be really smart, and we should do more of that and then look at the existing codes and say, can we simplify them?
Yeah.
We need to improve education. Huge Achilles heel for California at this point, the Democratic Party. I'm a former public school teacher. I've got little kids. Over half of our kids are not on grade level for reading. This is a ticking time bomb. And we need, whether it's Sacramento politicians, whether it's the teachers union, which I used to be a member of, whether it's advocacy groups, whatever, I mean, we have got to reform our education and deliver excellence for every young person. So I think unfortunately, it's many different things. The other thing I would say, and I don't want this to be an excuse, but the truth is big cities are unaffordable in part because they're so desirable. New York has been building and solving problems and investing in infrastructure and investing in education for generations, and it continues to be one of the least affordable places on earth because it keeps getting better and there's more opportunity and everybody wants to live there. So this will be a perennial challenge, but the question is it getting worse or better? And I think we can do a lot better than we're doing today.
Well, I mean, San Jose, San Francisco, and New York are the three most productive cities in the country by a long shot.
Yeah.
And one way New York has mitigated that is by building public transit, as you said, that can bring people from the periphery, even the outer boroughs, into the center.
That's right.
And from New York City. And the subway is an amazing system. I think liberals often dream about more public transit in this country, and yet we are seemingly so stymied by it. Of course, you mentioned the high-speed rail in California, but also the BART extension in San Jose.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about because it's like one of the most inefficient proposals on the table for building transit. I don't know the exact cost, but it's a staggering cost per mile.
$12.7 billion.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And it pains me as a Democrat because I want more of that. But if we're unable, like the Central Subway here in San Francisco, to build transit efficiently, we can't build anything. So do you have any ideas about how we break through to be able to build heavy public transit in a way that doesn't break the bank and allows us to deliver, more accessibility faster?
And by the way, one side thought is part of the way we make public transit work in California is to have residential and job density to build up along existing corridors and then improve service levels and expand the networks out as you were describing. But that's an aside. I'm not an expert in infrastructure, financing, and development. But we have to go look at every other country in the world, and particularly ones like France, Germany, Italy, countries that aren't always known for their efficiency.
Not low-cost places either.
Yeah, not low cost. They can build rail, including underground rail, at a fraction of the cost of what we do. My sense is it is largely, and again, about the regulatory environment. It's about the many layers of approvals between local, state, and federal levels of government. I talked earlier about the biggest challenge we face in government. I always say this, and it surprises people, is how decentralized we are. How many people we need reviewing and approving things. How many stakeholders we have to manage just within the system. Never mind considering what constituents out there want and need. Our regulations related to labor, to the environment, to building codes, to public input, to historical preservation, to native assets, to on and on and on. That has to be rethought. We have to decide what we want. It's the classic, everything bagel liberalism. We have tried to heap too many different values and priorities. Do we want a train that connects the entire Bay and rail and gets you seamlessly between all the major population centers in the Bay, or do we want something that is perfect on paper and may never get built?
A few years ago with California high-speed rail, which is its own. We could do a whole podcast just on that, I think. There was a company from Spain that does rail that came here, and they were kind of courted by the people running high-speed rail. And I think they came in with the idea that there was going to be maybe some kind of public-private partnership that was going to help them build, because when you have that kind of partnership, maybe it helps smooth over some of the regulatory hurdles so you can build things quicker. At least it seems that way anyway. Why is that like impossible in California?
What should be possible, but I think the reason it doesn't work is subbing in who builds and operates without changing the system of policies, the permitting processes, the regulatory environment around it doesn't change a whole lot unless you're willing to say, we will relax these environmental thresholds. We will change what the EIR demands you do. We will make more flexible the labor requirements. That's a third rail in California. I mean, what are we willing to trade off is the fundamental question. There's always the hope that technological innovation is very hopeful maybe, and who knows, maybe this will still bear out, that the Boring Company, for example, would be the answer. You always hope that technological innovation will allow us to do things better, faster, cheaper, but you can't just bank on technological innovation when fundamentally so many of our problems are human, and they're often, in this case, regulatory. They're the rule set.
I mean, you said a lot of things I love around tech, that you just said we got to lean into innovation. You said tech is good. You obviously run the city where so many startups and huge tech companies are based. You've also, I think as a founder, seemingly brought that mentality to the way that you govern and manage. You replaced, automatic raises with performance-based bonuses. You reduced your budget priorities from 40 to 4. I was taught early on in my career that strategy means focus and focus means trade-offs. You just talked about trade-offs. So everything you're saying is music to my ears, but I know one bipartisan issue nationally right now is that everyone doesn't like tech. And this like anti-tech fervor, even JD Vance likes Lena Khan, it seemingly is an issue that unites both parties in a strange way. And I think that reflects probably some skepticism amongst the public around technology companies and tech leaders, people from tech having even more power. How do you, I think, and what I want is more people from tech who know how to build things and get things done, better than anyone in today's economy going into the public sector. How do you think about convincing people that some of these best practices from cutting edge industries have a place and a home in the public sector and government?
There's a lot packed into that, and I have given it some thought, given my personal career journey, which is somewhat unusual in politics, I suppose. I think, first of all, we have to help people differentiate between what is so magical about the tech sector, which is the talented, creative, risk-taking, entrepreneurial people who are starting things and taking great risks and tinkering and taking shots on goal. And yeah, only 1 out of 1,000 really hits, but it makes life better for a lot of people. And that's really important. I want to come back to that in a minute. We have to differentiate that from the very, I think, genuine and appropriate concern about concentration of power and wealth. Look, we're seeing a bit of a replay of the Gilded Age, the robber barons, and I'm not saying that the tech execs of today have necessarily done anything unethical, but you just have a concentration of power and wealth. And that's going to always make people skeptical, as it should in a democratic society. So I think there's a legitimate question about how much bigger should those companies be able to get through acquisitions? How much should they be able to bundle their products? There are very legitimate questions there. That doesn't mean we should paint with a broad brushstroke and say that all of tech is somehow bad. I think it's actually in many ways the answer to our problems. And what I mean by that is, what I learned in that environment of the tech startup ecosystem, and again, I was mostly here in San Francisco at the time, but I've seen it in San Jose and everywhere in between. The thing that was most important that I learned in my decade in tech was nothing technical per se. It was a management approach. It was a management culture. It was performance management. It was being able to get a team of people together and say, this is our goal. Here's our objective measure. Here's how we measure success. This is why it matters. Do we all agree it matters? All right. Let's crowdsource everybody's best ideas for how we get there. And let's be iterative. Let's measure performance. Let's check in regularly. Let's throw out things that aren't working and pivot to things that are working. It takes a certain amount of, that sounds too clinical. It still takes vision and leadership. You have to be willing to make big bets, and that takes that founder, CEO, or mayor type mentality. But you want the organization to be nimble and to be able to take risks and to be a learning organization. I learned all that from tech, and that part of it can come into government. We can't, government will never be just like a business for a lot of reasons, but that culture of continuous improvement and learning and measurement and accountability should be part of any healthy organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a philanthropic group of some kind, a church, a business, or government.
Do you think Democrats can convince folks in the Central Valley or in Iowa or Kansas of those ideas?
I think if we go out and listen, start by listening, and genuinely, deeply understand their concerns and the problems that they're facing, and don't try to tell them what the answer is, but work with them to bring that kind of approach, bring that innovative spirit, entrepreneurial spirit to bear and to try solutions. I think it's a long road for the Democratic Party to rebuild relationships and trust in rural communities. I think we've had, I grew up in a rural community, and we've had decades of feeling, I think those communities have felt very ignored, if not downright belittled by the Democratic Party. So I think it's a long road, but I don't think it's impossible. I certainly think if you start by listening and really genuinely try to build a relationship, anything's possible.
We need to make like a photocopy. How can we clone Mayor Mahan all over the state? So I know I'm saying that because I like you, man. You're a good guy. Can I pivot back one last question, and then I'm not gonna ask again.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this in regards to homelessness. The HAP funding that the state is proposing to cut. And for folks that don't know what HAP funding is that's the funding that the state uses for interim solutions like shelter and things like that. And they want to cut that in half and take that money, either cut it or have it end up again in another housing bucket for more supportive housing. And again, I understand the concepts, but if you don't create a space for people to stabilize, like you've talked about extensively, then what are we really doing to these folks? And I think it's actually kind of cruel and misguided. What do you think?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning it, and I've been really vocal. Probably my two biggest disappointments with this budget have been the lack of funding for Prop 36 implementation, which is all about getting people who are severely addicted and habitually breaking laws into treatment and creating accountability for treatment. There's a pittance, $150 million in a state budget of over $300 billion, and immense need. I think that's a huge miss. The other is what is actually the zeroing out of HAP funding in this fiscal year. So what the state has chosen to do is take this important source of funding, and to your point, it's the one major source of flexible funding we have. It's $1 billion a year, which sounds like a lot, but again, we're talking about a state budget that's over $300 billion a year. This is, by many measures, the number one or two top concern of the residents of California. So we're talking about less than 0.33% of the budget here. They took so long to deploy the last fiscal year's allocation that it will get deployed in the coming fiscal year. There will be no new dollars in the coming fiscal year, so it's basically stretching it over 2 years. And then the following year, they're putting in basically a promise to maybe do to do $500 million. This is a huge miss. I mean, it's just if what we agree, and I think we mostly do, what we need to do is get people out of tent encampments, indoors, into shelter and treatment. Stabilize them, stabilize our communities, because this is about the very health of our cities, our state, our quality of life, our economic competitiveness. We should be putting as many dollars as we can afford into high quality interim solutions that offer shelter and services like treatment and job training. That is to me, pointy end of the spear of how we really change the reality on our streets today. And so it's incredibly disappointing. I think part of it comes down to what I have seen in Sacramento is the domination of organized interest groups. And I don't think there's an organized interest group for interim solutions, for treatment for homeless folks. There's just probably not a lot of money in it. There's not an organized lobby. and it just got squeezed out.
So we're talking a lot about the state and what the state needs. We have a governor's race coming up next year. What do you think California needs in its next governor?
Just mapping back on the conversation we've just had, I think we need someone who is genuinely focused on solving problems. It's got to be somebody who can very directly say to the community on homelessness, on high cost of living, particularly housing and energy costs, on public safety issues, on the quality of our schools. What we've been doing hasn't been working well enough. We can do better. We have to do better. And being able to break down for people in simple terms the things we're getting wrong and what we can do differently. And I think you have to be honest that there's no silver bullet on any of these issues. They're complicated. It's taken us decades to get to the place where we are today. And unfortunately, it will likely take a decade or more to really get to a much better place. But we've got to start now. So I think I'm just looking for somebody who is focused on problem understanding, breaking down problems and offering solutions, is going to be really direct with people, and just run a solutions-oriented campaign that doesn't try to cater to every interest group, every identity group, I think we play too much of this game of trying to cater to everybody politically and ideologically versus just solving problems.
You said at the top of the interview that you've always been interested in public service and have been socially oriented. I read online that you're a person of faith, that you go to church every Sunday with your family. I'm curious specifically about the role faith plays in how you've chosen to spend your life. But more broadly, like, what drives you to do this work every day? When it gets really hard, what motivates you?
Well, I don't want to get called out by my fellow parishioners and neighbors, so I don't make it to church every week. But I did. I grew up going to Catholic schools. Our kids go to a Catholic school, and we do go to mass. And truth be told, I'm a little eclectic. I also really like. I've learned a lot from studying Buddhism a bit. But yeah, I think for me, faith. And I would broaden it out beyond Catholicism, but our faith traditions and what I have taken away from my attempt to grapple with the sort of accumulated wisdom of humanity as expressed in organized religion is this notion of interdependence and interconnectedness. And at the end of the day, what we do affects everybody else. And if someone else is suffering, it affects me negatively. And feeling a sense of wholeness or oneness and connection is something that I don't think is just a nice idea. I think is the truth. I think is really true. I also think, and one of the things I learned growing up in the Catholic faith is that the kind of the highest sense of meaning comes from love, which is really service to others, using your skills, using your passion to try to make others' lives better, to give back in some way. So I do think that has very much shaped the mindset I've tried to bring into public service, which is to think of it as service, to try not to get too caught up in the day-to-day. Am I winning or losing this political cycle in the media or whatever, but more am I focused on truth, on serving others, on solving problems, on it sounds a little cheesy to say, but finding some way to express love toward and solve problems for society. So, yeah, it is. I think it's important to have a moral grounding. Otherwise, I think the feedback loop of elected life and politics can become very consuming, of just wanting to win the next press cycle or get the most likes on social media or be the most popular or rise through the ranks the fastest. And I don't think that's what it's about. So I do find faith and family and friends to be very grounding.
I love this guy. Matt, you gave me hope, man. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for saying those things. Well, it's been amazing.
It's been good chatting with you guys.
To have you here with us. We really appreciate you taking the time, and I can't wait to see what the future brings for San Jose and for you, and maybe for whatever happens in the future in regards to your career. But whatever it is, we'll be watching and we'll be supporting you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation. I really enjoyed it and look forward to continuing soon.
Yeah, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have you here. It's awesome to share some time with such a rising star, hopefully in the future of California politics and Democratic politics. And for all of you who are watching, we'd love to hear from you about what you think of Mayor Matt's leadership and the San Jose example. So feel free to comment on YouTube or on Twitter, and we will see you next time on Fast Times.